can't push him either.
Or
Wait, that did 2 phases. And he just jumped off the map.
the thing is, I peeked over the map and I just hear an eagle go.
Are we soft locked? Oh no, he's over here.
I hear him. Yeah. Oh my god. I need a second dog. Give me a.
What the fuck? Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we'll be going over Wisp. And first things first, let's go into the build. So with Wisp, I have 2 builds, though there are a lot of different things you can do with Wisp. This first build is an ensnare build, as I believe that a grouping tool on Wisp is very strong, especially because Breach Surge scales exceptionally well when you combine it with a grouping tool. Because I'm using a grouping tool, I do have to run slightly more range than otherwise, which does kind of make your shock modes provide too much CC, particularly for defense game modes. So I would not suggest this for defense unless it's like a high level steel path mission, as this will just slow the mission down. Though this can be a benefit in certain defense missions if it's actually to the point to where you CCing and slowing down enemies can become a benefit. But for the most part, I would suggest not running this build in defense missions. You might be seeing 223% strength and thinking this is low for a Wisp build, and while it is low for a Wisp build, it does work completely well, especially once you realize how much strength you actually have. With growing power, augmented, and madurai, which is the focus school of choice, for sling strength, you now have another 125% strength for your motes, pushing you up to 348% strength. But that's not all, as you can also very easily use power drain to snapshot your next mote for a 398% strength mote that will last for the entire mission as long as you place it correctly. Once you have all your buffs up, you can find a spot where enemies don't really walk and just place it into the wall, and now you have this nice little area, and even if a nullifier walks past it, it won't nullify it as it's off away tucked in the wall. And if for some reason 400% strength isn't enough, you could go one step further and summon a Nidus Spectre, and a Nidus Spectre will always apply his link to you as his first ability, and this gives you 28% more ability strength, which is a strength multiplier, pushing you above 500% strength. This should be completely fine for almost all the content in the game, and if you want to go even further, then you could just run a fissure and wait for the fissure doubler, and now you have over 1000% strength. Even for level cap builds while shield gating, having this extra health is very nice, as it allows you to survive chip damage and survive status effects. As for the second build, it is just a buff build, but this one is tailored specifically towards Nourish, as Nourish allows you to drop efficiency altogether, and honestly, if you really like a Nourish Wisp build, you could also drop Flow, which I was running a flawed one due to polarity issues. You could slot a single blue Archon Shard for max energy, and now you just have an open mod slot on this build. One benefit to Nourish is you're running so much strength because A, you can slot Blind Rage thanks to Nourish's energy regen, which also works with Archon Stretch, by the way, so you get insane energy recovery, which allows you to drop Flow once you slot an Archon Shard if you really like this build. I wouldn't suggest just throwing on a blue Archon Shard for energy unless you really like this build, because the blue energy shard is completely useless for almost all of her other builds, but Nourish also allows you to drop Arcane Energize for Molt Vigor for 45% more ability strength on your mote. Now, as for the weapon loadouts, I personally enjoy using either the Paris or the Nadruk on Wisp, as I mostly use Ensnare, and both of these weapons work very well with Ensnare. The Paris build I was using was a gas/hybrid build. Unfortunately, this build was kind of carried by my Riven, but I did test and it does work without the Riven. There are a couple mods you could slot here. You could slot either Amalgam Serration, which is nice as it gives you some extra sprint speed, which you're already fast as Wisp, but this gives you more. Also, it giving you a flat damage buff is nice for getting your starter stacks at the beginning to build up Galvanized Aptitude and Primary Deadhead. Alternatives are Galvanized Scope, Bladed Rounds, and Munitions. Oh god, what is it called? Hammer Shot. On my Paris, I was choosing to use the 60% status chance buff for the final evolution, as this is a base status chance buff, meaning that with just Malignant Force and Galvanized Aptitude, you have close to 200% status chance. Meaning with split flights, you're now shooting 5 arrows that on average proc 2 status effects per arrow, and being like 80% gas weighted, you apply 8 gas procs almost every single shot. It is very, very fun and very strong. Alternatively, you could use an Adarok. Another thing that Wisp is good for weapons is she allows you to drop fire rate mods, as her first ability already gives you all the fire rate you'll ever need on your weapons, especially once you're fully stacked, as again, even with a low strength build, you'll still have close to 400% strength, so that's 120% fire rate. Which allows you to drop a mod on the Nadaruk for the slash build or the gas build. If you want, you would be able to drop Vital Acceleration, which again is strong as it frees up a slot for a Riven, Hammer Shot, or whatever you want. This, by the way, this build was specifically for Nourish, which is why I don't have an element on. I was sourcing my element from Nourish. As for secondary, oh, you know what? I'm going to go back to primary real quick. Just because I like using the Nadaruk and the Paris on Wisp doesn't mean that you have to use that or like they're the best. You can realistically use anything on Wisp because her kit just works so well to buff mediocre weapons. Even single target weapons that otherwise struggle are nice because Breach Surge turns all single target weapons into pseudo AoEs thanks to the Breach Surge sparks. As for the secondaries, it's pretty much the exact same thing as the primaries. You can use whatever you like. However, I do suggest running a primer for most of the builds, though if you don't want a primer, you could just use a Latum, a Spore Lacer, a Gaze, etc, etc, etc. As to the melee, I do still suggest the Praetos for the 30% parkour velocity and the 20% sprint speed. Though again, feel free to use whatever you want. As for focus schools, I did mention earlier that that Madurai is the focus school of choice for their 40% ability strength. The 50% casting speed is also nice for Breach Surge, as it does have it's not a lengthy casting time, but it is kind of annoying to cast without power transfer, and Phoenix Talons for the 30% physical damage buff. However, if you plan on going to level cap, Unaru works wonders as it allows you to drop Prime Sure-Footed thanks to Poise, freeing up a mod slot, and it also gives you access to Caustic Strike, giving you an armor strip. Caustic Strike works very well with Ensnare, as you can Ensnare, suck all the enemies in, and armor strip all of them at once. And then last but not least is the Panzer with the standard Panzer build with the synth mods equipped. Now moving on to the rankings, we're discussing Wisp in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly, her KPM, secondly, her survivability, thirdly, her viability, and finally, how fun she is to play. All of this data is sampled from a 1-hour solo Steel Path Mott run with no Spectres, no on-call, and of course no Archon Shards. Now let's begin with her first topic, her KPM. I'm going to try to keep this brief, and Wisp has pretty good KPM for a gun frame. This is because she has good movement speed, which does slightly increase your KPM, but she also has a weapon buff in the form of a fire rate bonus. This fire rate bonus is incredibly useful as some weapons just don't have the mod slots to slot a fire rate mod, which is this is a huge boon for them, or some weapons desperately need a fire rate mod, so they have to give up a separate crucial mod, but now you can drop that fire rate mod that is otherwise a complete necessity on them, and now they can slot some other mods, or just for some general QOL, for some fire, or for some, magazine capacity, reload speed, etc, etc. Not only that, but the fact that she can run pretty much any helmet in the game also increases her KPM, as you can just run a grouping tool, and running a grouping tool on a gun frame always increases their KPM, and she at least has a reason to do it, and the fact that it synergizes well with Breach Surge. Speaking of Breach Surge, that's another thing that's good for her KPM, as it turns her single target weapons into pseudo AoEs, like I mentioned earlier, and it also increases the path of destruction of AoE weapons if you prefer to use those anyway. All in all, I will give Wisp an A+ for her KPM. Now moving on to the second topic, her survivability, and I really shouldn't have to tell you about her survivability, but I will go step by step. So first off, if you're running a health tank, Wisp is very strong, as her second ability makes you invincible for 3 seconds, which that's strong for both a health and a shield tank. But for a health tank, that gives you 3 seconds of breathing room to either wait out status effects or allow yourself to heal up from your passive mode healing. Not only this, whenever you throw out your 2 and you don't double tap it, you're also invisible, which obviously if you're invisible, you're most of the time not getting hit. Wisp's first ability gives you about 1200 health on the low end, even when running the low strength build, which allows you to, well, you just have high health. So then you can just slot adaptation and arcane guardian or arcane ultimatum, whichever you prefer, and now you have a decent base health and armor pool for a health tank on top of having a 3 seconds invincibility panic button. If you're running a shield gate build, you have all of this and more as you're shield gating, and it's super easy to shield gate on her, as the second ability that makes you invincible is also what you use to shield gate with. On top of all this, you have the shock modes, which people often overlook how good the shock modes actually are for CC. You gotta remember, you're giving your motes to not only yourself, but your allies and your companions. This means in a full squad, just based on party members plus their companions, you're applying 8 shock modes, which is hitting 40 enemies per second. This is ignoring any other random things that you can target, such as if you spawn a Spectre, you can give them motes, etc., etc. So her shock modes provide good CC, which increases your survivability. Breach Surge is good CC, as whenever you cast it, it blinds enemies, stuns them for about a second, and then it also sends off a bunch of radiation sparks, especially, again, because the shock modes proc the Breach Surge, which then just spreads radiation, which does increase survivability in the form that the enemies will be shooting at each other instead of you. There's the invisibility on whenever you're jumping from her passive, plus her 2, like I mentioned earlier. And I don't know. I think that's it. I might have missed something, but just to put it blunt, her survivability is insane. She's one of the easiest frames in the entirety of the game to survive on. Scaling all the way up to level cap, I will give her an S+ for her survivability. I don't know if I gave Revenant his own rank for survivability, but if I didn't, I should have, because if Revenant and Wisp are both S+, it sounds like they're the same, but they're not. Revenant is still by far the easiest frame in the game to survive on, but Wisp is insane. I just should have given Revenant his own rank if I did not. Now moving on to the third topic, her viability, and her viability, as you can probably tell by everything else I've said, is also very high. She's decent in everyday missions like captures and exterminates, thanks to her speed buffs, which also get applied to the entire team, so that's another benefit. Her fire rate buffs also make a lot of weapons viable that otherwise aren't, so that's a plus. She's really good in disruption, as just the passive CC from the shock modes is really good to keep enemies off of you while you're dealing with the demo. Also, you can throw out your 2 to be invisible while you're dealing with the demo. Ensnare to group enemies together and kill them. Like, she's just good. If you're doing endurance runs, she can help the entire party stay alive. It's not just her. Breach Surge helps everybody. Like, the only game mode where I think Wisp kind of falls off is defense, but even in defense, I'm pretty sure Wisp is a meta frame if you're like doing heavily optimized runs. So I will give her an S- for her viability as well. Now moving on to the final topic, how fun she is. And this is a bit hard for me to gauge, as Wisp is my most played frame in the game, so I am kind of bored of her. But I think she has so much going for her that she is fun, unless you're just one of those people that don't like playing things just because they're popular. But I think she does have enough going for her to justify her being fun. Like, Her fire rate bonus allows you to have like a wide variety in your arsenal. She can pretty much run any helmet ability in the game and make it function like at a high level. So she has a lot of build variety. Like just because I'm running Ensnare plus Nourish doesn't mean that those are the only two builds. Like you could easily run Empower, which is like the basic Wisp build. Like I just unlocked Helmet, then I'm playing Wisp. You could run Roar, you could run Eclipse. You could run Elemental Ward if you wanted to for even more armor or health. Like you don't need it, but you can. Like there's an Eclipse Zal build, which is very nice because you're invisible on Wisp while you're jumping. It synergizes very well with her. Pillage works on her. Thero Strike works. Terrify works. Like every single helmet in the game works. So she has a lot of build variety. And again, because of her fire rate, it opens up a lot of weapons that you otherwise can't use on other frames. So she has arsenal variety, build variety. She has the sprint speed buff on her 1, which just moving fast on this game is fun. Like going through missions quickly is fun. So she has more going for her in her fun department than she has against her. So I will give her an A rank for her fun. In conclusion, Wisp is an S tier Warframe, and I really don't have too much else to say, so I'm going to leave it here and go back to playing Deviri.